The afternoon sun hung low, casting long shadows across the quiet suburban street. It was the kind of day Margaret enjoyed most, peaceful, still, and uneventful. A walk with her service dog Max was a daily ritual, a chance to breathe fresh air and escape the confines of her home. She rolled her wheelchair steadily down the sidewalk, the rhythmic hum of its wheels blending with the soft padding of Max's paws beside her. At 68, Margaret carried a quiet dignity that spoke of a life filled with service and sacrifice. A veteran who had given her all for her country, she now bore the visible scars of that commitment, a prosthetic leg and the daily challenges of navigating a world that didn't always accommodate her needs. But none of that stopped her. She had faced life head-on and conquered obstacles most people couldn't imagine. The street was unusually empty, the kind of silence that can feel serene and unnerving. Margaret glanced at Max, her loyal companion, and smiled. His presence was reassuring, a constant reminder that she was never truly alone. But as she rounded the corner, that silence shifted. From out of nowhere, a group of young men appeared, stepping onto the sidewalk ahead of her. They didn't seem like locals. There was an edge to them, a coldness in their eyes that set Margaret on edge. She slowed her pace, her grip tightening on the armrests of her wheelchair. Then came the first taunt, sharp and cutting. It was followed by another, louder this time, filled with mockery and disdain. They pointed at her wheelchair, at her prosthetic leg, and then at Max, as though the sight of her and her dog was some kind of joke. The words they hurled were laced with venom, dripping with cruelty. Margaret held her ground, her voice steady as she responded with calm resolve. She had heard words like these before and learned long ago not to let them break her. But her refusal to cower seemed to embolden the group. They drew closer, their demands escalating, her purse, her belongings, anything of value. Max's ears perked up. He sensed the shift before Margaret could fully process it, his body stiffening, his gaze fixed on the gang. A low growl rumbled in his throat, a sound Margaret had heard only a handful of times. The air seemed to thicken, the silence now heavy with unspoken threats. Margaret's pulse quickened, but her faith in Max remained unshaken. Would his loyalty and training be enough to protect her from the danger that was closing in? In that moment, the quiet afternoon walk transformed into something else entirely, a test of courage, loyalty, and survival. Keep watching to uncover the full story. Before we get into this story, take a moment to share where you're watching from in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for daily news stories. Margaret's life was one of quiet strength. She had grown up in a time when opportunities for women, let alone black women, were scarce. But Margaret had never let limitations define her. She enlisted in the military at a young age, driven by a deep love for her country and a determination to protect the freedoms so often taken for granted. Her years of service were marked by both triumphs and tragedies, none more significant than the injury that left her with a prosthetic leg. Now in her late 60s, Margaret lived alone in a modest home, the walls lined with photographs of her life, a wedding picture of her and her late husband, medals from her military service, and candid snapshots of her beloved service dog, Max. Her husband had passed a decade earlier, leaving her with cherished memories and an unshakable resilience. But the loneliness could be heavy at times. Max, however, filled the void in a way nothing else could. A sleek German shepherd with intelligent eyes, Max was not just a service dog, but Margaret's constant companion, trained to respond to emergencies, retrieve objects, and even provide emotional support. Max had become her lifeline. Their bond was undeniable, a partnership built on mutual trust and unspoken understanding. He had been by her side for years, vigilant and unwavering, ready to protect her at a moment's notice. The neighborhood knew Max. He was the dog who walked alongside Margaret every day, the one who never barked unnecessarily and never strayed from her side. For Margaret, Max wasn't just a pet. He was family. But not everyone in the community saw things the same way. The group of young men who now stood in Margaret's path had gained a reputation. Locals whispered about them, boys who had drifted into trouble, their days spent causing mischief and targeting anyone they thought wouldn't fight back. They sought out vulnerability, seeing it as an easy mark rather than something to be respected. This gang, if they could even be called that, had no loyalty to one another and no code of conduct. Their actions were often impulsive, driven by whatever fleeting sense of power they could extract from making others feel small. They had harassed shopkeepers, vandalized property, and even intimidated a local elder into handing over her wallet not long ago. Now, as they closed in on Margaret, their intentions were clear. They weren't here by accident. They had seen her from a distance and decided she would be their next target. To them, she was just another face, an old woman in a wheelchair, too frail to defend herself and too alone for anyone to care. But there was something they hadn't accounted for, the unyielding spirit of Margaret and the fierce loyalty of her companion. As the gang moved closer, they underestimated not just the woman before them, but the bond she shared with her dog, a bond that would soon be tested in ways they couldn't have anticipated. It was supposed to be an uneventful afternoon, like so many others before it. Margaret guided her wheelchair down the quiet street, Max walking faithfully at her side. The warmth of the sun brushed against her skin, and the sound of distant birdsong filled the air. She had planned to make a quick circuit around the neighborhood before returning home, where a book and a cup of tea awaited her. But as she approached the end of the block, the atmosphere shifted. A group of young men stepped out from a side street, spreading across the sidewalk as if they owned it. They were laughing amongst themselves, but the moment their eyes locked on Margaret, their demeanor changed. Their conversation stopped, and a cruel smirk spread across the face of the tallest one. They moved closer, their presence impossible to ignore. Margaret's hands instinctively tightened on the armrests of her wheelchair as they fanned out, blocking her path. The leader of the group, a wiry figure with a sharp voice, leaned forward. His tone was mocking as he greeted her, his words dripping with derision. "Well, well, look what we have here. Taking your fancy little dog for a stroll, Grandma?" Margaret met his gaze steadily. She had faced men like this before, different faces, different times, but the same hunger for power over others. She refused to let it shake her. Her calmness and silence seemed to amuse them. Another one of the group, a shorter man with a scar running down his cheek, pointed at her prosthetic leg. "What's the matter, lady? Can't walk like the rest of us? Or is that thing just for show?" The laughter that followed was sharp and cruel. Margaret didn't flinch, but Max did. The dog's ears perked up, and he stepped slightly ahead of her, his eyes fixed on the group. When Margaret made a move to pass, the leader stepped directly into her path. His voice was louder now, his tone less playful and more demanding. "Not so fast. You've got something we want." He gestured toward her small crossbody bag, the one she always carried on her walks. Inside was little more than a wallet, her phone, and a few personal items, but to them it might as well have been a treasure. Margaret's voice was steady as she spoke. "I don't have anything worth taking. Let me go, and no one has to get hurt." Her words, though measured, seemed to fan the flames of their aggression. "Hurt?" the leader sneered. "Lady, the only one who's going to get hurt here is you if you don't hand that over." The group closed in, their taunts growing louder and more vicious. One of them made a sudden move toward her bag, but Max was faster. The service dog growled low and sharp, stepping firmly between Margaret and the man. The leader took a step back, surprised by the dog's reaction, but his hesitation didn't last long. "You better control that mutt before we do," he spat. Margaret straightened in her wheelchair, her voice calm but firm. "This isn't what you want to do. I've given everything for this country. Everything. I don't want trouble." Her words, meant to de-escalate, only seemed to irritate them further. Another man, younger than the rest, laughed harshly. "Oh, she's a soldier now. Guess she thinks that makes her untouchable." The leader turned to Max, his sneer returning. "Let's see how brave you are without your little guard dog." Tension hung in the air, thick and heavy. Margaret's heart raced, but she didn't show it. She knew Max wouldn't back down, and neither would she. The quiet suburban street had become a battleground, and the stakes were growing higher with each passing second. Margaret sat upright in her wheelchair, meeting their threats with the same steady resolve that had carried her through life's greatest challenges. When the leader of the group stepped forward again, his voice harsh and commanding, Margaret's answer was firm and unwavering. "I'm not giving you anything." Her refusal, simple yet resolute, struck a nerve. The laughter stopped, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Then came the shove. A hand yanked at her bag. The wheelchair rocked slightly, but Margaret held tight, refusing to let go. Max's reaction was immediate. He moved with purpose, his body now fully between Margaret and the man trying to take her belongings. His growl was low and threatening, a sound that spoke volumes even without words. The gang hesitated, their confidence faltering for the first time. "Call off your dog," one of them yelled, his voice tinged with frustration. But Margaret didn't flinch. Her grip on the bag remained firm, and her trust in Max was unshaken. The leader, angered by their failure to intimidate her, barked at one of the younger men to do something. Emboldened by the command, the young man lunged forward, reaching again for Margaret's bag. That's when Max made his move. In a flash, the loyal dog leaped, clamping his powerful jaws onto the man's arm. A cry of pain rang out as the young man stumbled back, struggling against Max's unrelenting grip. The gang's confidence dissolved into chaos. "Get him off me!" the man screamed, his voice panicked. The others froze, momentarily stunned by the dog's ferocity. Max released his grip only to reposition himself, his sharp gaze now fixed on the rest of the group. He growled again, his stance protective, daring anyone to come closer. Margaret seized the moment. Reaching for the small device clipped to her wheelchair, she pressed the button on her emergency alert system. The soft beep confirmed that help was on the way. But in this moment, it was Max who was keeping her safe. The gang, now visibly shaken, began to argue amongst themselves. One of them stepped back, muttering, "I didn't sign up for this." But the leader wasn't ready to back down. "It's just a dog," he snapped, his voice a mix of anger and fear, but even he didn't move closer. Nearby, the commotion hadn't gone unnoticed. A shopkeeper from across the street peeked out, his expression shifting from curiosity to alarm as he realized what was happening. Without hesitation, he picked up his phone and called the police, his voice urgent as he relayed the scene unfolding before him. At the same time, a young woman walking down the opposite side of the street stopped in her tracks. She watched for a moment, her hand instinctively going to her phone. With quick movements, she began recording, her camera capturing everything: the gang's aggression, Max's bravery, and Margaret's calm refusal to back down. "Stay strong," the woman called out, her voice cutting through the tension. It was a small gesture, but one that didn't go unnoticed. The leader of the gang turned his head sharply, noticing the woman and her phone. His frustration boiled over. "Turn that off," he shouted, but the woman didn't budge. Instead, she stood her ground, her camera still focused on the scene. The gang's dynamic shifted again. What had started as a show of dominance was now unraveling. Max's continued growls kept them at bay, and the growing attention from witnesses was making it harder for them to maintain control. Margaret's voice, calm yet commanding, broke the standoff. "You've made your choice. Leave now before this gets worse for you." It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the authority of someone who had faced far greater adversaries. For a moment, it seemed like the leader might push forward, but the sound of distant sirens cut through the air. The police were on their way. The gang's time was running out. The sound of sirens grew louder, their unmistakable wail piercing through the tense standoff. The gang exchanged panicked glances, their bravado crumbling as the realization sank in. Time was no longer on their side. "We've got to go," one of them muttered, already stepping back. But the leader, still clinging to his fading sense of control, hesitated. "Not yet," he barked, though his voice lacked the authority it had moments earlier. Before they could decide their next move, Max chose for them. The service dog, unwavering in his focus, lunged toward the leader as he took a step closer to Margaret. His sharp bark echoed down the street, and the gang leader stumbled, falling back as Max snapped at the air between them. "Get that dog away!" the man yelled, his voice breaking. He scrambled to his feet, but Max didn't relent, his stance unyielding. The others took this as their cue to scatter. Two of them bolted down the street, their footsteps fading quickly as they disappeared around the corner. But one wasn't so lucky. Max had shifted his attention, blocking the path of the youngest member of the group. The boy froze, his eyes darting between the oncoming police cars and the dog standing defiantly in his way. When he tried to step around, Max moved with him, cutting off every possible escape. By the time the first patrol car screeched to a halt, it was clear the gang's plan had fallen apart. An officer stepped out, his hand resting on the holster of his weapon as he assessed the scene. The young woman with the phone waved him over, her voice urgent as she explained what had happened. "They tried to rob her," she said, pointing toward Margaret. "She didn't back down, and the dog, he protected her. I've got it all on video." The second officer approached Margaret, who sat calmly in her wheelchair, her hand resting on Max's head. The dog was alert, but no longer growling. His job for the moment was done. "Ma'am, are you all right?" the officer asked, his tone gentle but professional. Margaret nodded, her voice steady despite the ordeal. "I'm fine, thanks to Max. He kept them from hurting me." As the officers moved to detain the cornered gang member, Margaret began recounting the events. Her words were clear and deliberate, each detail painting a vivid picture of what had transpired. She spoke not with anger or fear, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had long since learned the value of composure under pressure. Meanwhile, the young woman handed her phone to another officer who reviewed the footage. The video left no room for doubt. It captured the gang's mocking words, their physical aggression, and, most damning of all, their attempt to overpower a disabled woman. The officer reviewing the footage glanced toward Margaret and Max, a look of admiration crossing his face. "That dog's a hero," he said loud enough for her to hear. Margaret allowed herself a small smile. "He's my protector. He always has been." As the detained gang member was led to the police car, his protests grew louder. "It wasn't my idea. I didn't even do anything," he shouted. But the evidence was clear. His words carried no weight against the footage and the eyewitness accounts. The officer closest to Margaret crouched slightly, meeting her gaze. "Your service dog did an incredible job. He's well trained." Margaret gave a single nod, her hand still resting on Max's head. "He's more than just a dog. He's family." For the first time since the incident began, the street seemed to exhale. The sirens faded, the commotion quieted, and Margaret remained a steady presence at the center of it all. Max sat beside her, his body relaxed, but his eyes still scanning the street, ensuring that the danger was truly over. Justice was swift and decisive. The gang, now identified through the video and witness accounts, faced a series of serious charges: assault, attempted robbery, and hate crimes. The youngest member, the one Max had cornered, provided additional details about the group's actions, sealing their fate. The leader, whose taunts and aggression were prominently featured in the viral video, was handed the heaviest charges. The video itself spread like wildfire. Uploaded by the young woman who had filmed the encounter, it garnered millions of views in just days. The footage struck a nerve, sparking outrage across social media and reigniting conversations about the need to protect vulnerable individuals, especially those who, like Margaret, had already sacrificed so much for their country. Comments flooded the video. "This woman is a hero, and so is her dog. How can anyone be so heartless? Thank God for Max. We need stricter penalties for crimes like this. Enough is enough." The public outcry extended beyond words. Community members, moved by Margaret's bravery and Max's unwavering loyalty, organized fundraisers to support her. Local businesses pledged donations, and a nearby veterans organization stepped in to provide Margaret with additional resources. including financial assistance and home upgrades to make her life easier. Max, meanwhile, became a local celebrity. News stations featured his story, describing how his quick actions had saved Margaret from a potentially devastating attack. Children in the neighborhood began drawing pictures of Max as a superhero, and one local artist even painted a mural depicting Margaret and Max side by side, a testament to their unbreakable bond. The recognition didn't stop there. A national veterans group awarded Max with an honorary Medal for Valor, presenting it to him during a small ceremony attended by Margaret, neighbors, and supporters. Margaret, touched by the overwhelming show of kindness, accepted the honor on Max's behalf, her voice steady as she spoke. "Max has always been my protector," she said. "He's not just my service dog, he's my partner, my guardian, and my best friend. I hope his story inspires others to understand the importance of loyalty, of standing up for what's right, no matter the odds." For Margaret, the incident was more than a frightening moment. It was a reminder of her resilience. In the days following the attack, she reflected on the life she had led, the battles she had fought, and the strength that had carried her through each challenge. "This isn't the first time I've faced adversity," she told a reporter during a quiet moment after the ceremony, "and it won't be the last, but we can't let fear or hate win. We have to stand firm, not just for ourselves, but for those who can't." Her words resonated far and wide, echoed by the thousands who shared the video and joined the call for change. Discussions about community safety, discrimination, and the rights of individuals with disabilities reached local government meetings and online forums. Margaret's story became a catalyst for real conversations about what it meant to protect and respect the most vulnerable members of society. Through it all, Max remained by Margaret's side, his loyalty unshaken. The two continued their daily walks, though they never went unnoticed again. Neighbors stopped to greet them, offering warm smiles and kind words, and children ran up to pat Max on the head, always careful to ask for permission first. For Margaret, life returned to its usual rhythm, but with a newfound sense of connection to her community. As she wheeled down the familiar streets, Max trotting faithfully beside her, she carried not just the memories of the attack, but the strength of the support she had received, and the knowledge that together she and Max had made a difference. In her final words to the reporter, she summed it up simply: "Max and I, we're a team, and when you have loyalty, courage, and a little bit of love on your side, there's nothing you can't face." This story is more than just an account of one woman's bravery and her dog's loyalty. It is a reminder of the challenges faced by those who have already given so much to protect others. Individuals like Margaret, who have dedicated their lives to service, only to confront adversity even in their later years. But Margaret's courage and Max's steadfast loyalty demonstrate the power of resilience and the importance of standing up against injustice. It begs a question that we must all ask ourselves. How do we, as individuals and as a community, protect the most vulnerable among us? What would you have done in Margaret's position? How far can loyalty, courage, and determination take us when faced with the unexpected? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. Your voice matters in these conversations, and together we can continue the dialogue that Margaret's story has inspired. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Hit the like button and share it with your friends and family. Let Margaret and Max's story serve as a beacon of hope and a call to action for change. Finally, let's not forget the individuals like Margaret who face these battles every day. Whether it's through supporting local veterans organizations, advocating for better protections for individuals with disabilities, or simply staying alert to injustice in your community, there is always something we can do to make a difference. Margaret and Max's story is a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the bond between a person and their companion. But it is also a call for all of us to look inward and ask, how can I stand against injustice? How can I make my community safer and kinder for everyone? And if you haven't already, subscribe, like, and join us each day for stories that challenge us to reflect, inspire us to act, and remind us of the values that truly matter: loyalty, compassion, and justice. Thank you for watching.